Michael Carter had been looking forward to nothing more than a quiet evening at home, the kind of evening where the weight of the world finally lifted from his shoulders the moment he turned into his driveway. He pressed the familiar button on the remote. The garage door began its slow mechanical rise, and for a split second everything seemed routine. But then his eyes locked on something that should not have been there, something that made him slam the brakes and sit frozen behind the wheel. Parked inside his own garage in the space where his car was supposed to be, was a shiny silver SUV. Not a delivery, not a mistake, not a friend who had accidentally pulled in. This was deliberate. This was intrusion. And sitting behind the wheel, as if she had every right to be there, was Patricia Vaughn, the woman whose name was whispered in annoyance across the neighborhood, the HOA board member whose reputation for fines, petty rules, and power games had turned every resident's life into a constant headache. Michael's pulse quickened, a rush of disbelief crashing into anger. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't even look surprised. She just sat there, arms crossed, with a smug expression that said she expected him to apologize for daring to be upset. Michael cut the engine and stepped out of his car slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. The garage door creaked the rest of the way up, spilling light into the driveway, and already a couple of neighbors walking their dogs slowed their pace, sensing something unusual was about to unfold. "Patricia," Michael said, his voice steady but carrying an edge. "What exactly are you doing in my garage?" She rolled down her window just enough to be heard, her tone clipped, dripping with entitlement. "There was no parking on the street. I had a meeting to attend, and since your driveway was empty, I figured this was the most logical place." Michael blinked, almost laughing at the absurdity. "Logical place? This is my home, my garage. You can't just pull in here like you own the block." Patricia smirked, tapping her nails against the steering wheel. "I'm on the board, Michael. I keep this neighborhood running. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made." Her words landed like poison. Michael felt the heat rise in his chest, but instead of shouting, he did something she didn't expect. Without another word, he reached for the remote still in his hand and pressed the button. The garage door began to descend, the metal rattle echoing like a drumbeat of defiance. Patricia's expression shifted in an instant from smug to alarmed as she realized what was happening. "Wait, what do you think you're doing? Open that back up right now," she barked, fumbling with her door handle. But it was too late. The garage door sealed shut with a heavy thud, locking her and her SUV inside. Michael stood in the driveway, calm now, his breath even. He clicked the lock on his remote, securing it. The neighbors who had stopped to watch were wide-eyed, whispering to each other. Patricia's muffled voice could be heard shouting from inside the garage, her fists pounding on the dashboard. The scene was surreal, electric, and already drawing attention. In that moment, Michael knew this wasn't just about a stolen parking spot. This was about years of silent frustration, about an entire neighborhood living under the thumb of one woman's arrogance. And tonight, the balance of power was about to shift. Before we go deeper into this unbelievable true story of HOA abuse, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join the Black Power community where kids could ride their bikes in the cul-de-sac and neighbors waved when they passed by. But it did not take long for him to learn that the peace came at a price, and that price seemed to control it. All of you liars. Those rules are in place for a reason. I was protecting property values. You should be thanking me." Her voice cracked with fury, but instead of intimidation, it only seemed to fuel the resentment swelling in the crowd. Darren raised his phone high, the screen glowing as he recorded every second. "No one's thanking you, Patricia. We've been living under your thumb, afraid to speak up, afraid of fines and harassment. But not tonight. Tonight, everyone sees what you really are." Others joined in, their voices overlapping, recalling fines for paint colors, threats of legal action, letters slipped into mailboxes at odd hours. The floodgates had opened, and each story layered onto the last until the air was thick with collective anger that had been buried for too long. A teenager from down the block holding a basketball under his arm spoke up with more courage than his parents ever had. "You took our hoops away. You said they were ugly. You ruined our summer." That one cut differently. The innocence in his voice, the memory of something as small as a basketball game being taken away, struck the crowd with a sting sharper than money. Patricia shouted again. Had never heard directed at her before. The power she had clung to so tightly was unraveling in front of her eyes, and no threat, no peace. Her voice slicing through the night air. "You're all complicit, every single one of you. Filming this is harassment. Siding with him is harassment. You'll regret this when the board meets again." But her threats landed flat. The crowd didn't flinch. Instead, someone yelled back, "There won't be a board when this is over." Laughter broke out, sharp and liberating, the kind of laughter that comes when fear dissolves. Patricia's face twisted, her composure cracking. Michael stood steady, silent for a long moment, letting the noise rise and fall around him before he spoke. "You don't scare anyone anymore, Patricia. You should listen to them. You should hear what people are saying. They're done being ruled by you." She slammed her palm against the wheel, her voice rising to a scream. "I am the board. Without me, this neighborhood will collapse. You think anyone else could manage this chaos?" Her words sounded less like authority now and more like desperation. She reached for her phone, dialing quickly, muttering under her breath, then pressing it to her ear. The neighbors fell quiet for a moment, watching as she began shouting into the receiver. "Yes, police, I need assistance. I'm being unlawfully detained in my neighbor's garage. He's holding me hostage. There's a mob out here. You need to come immediately." The silence in the crowd broke into a mixture of disbelief and outrage. People shook their heads, scoffed, some even booed. "Hostage?" Darren called out. "You drove into his garage without permission. You trapped yourself." Patricia ignored him, still on the phone, her words frantic, her voice trembling not with fear but with anger at being powerless. Michael remained calm, his voice steady as he addressed the neighbors. "Let her call. Let them come. I've got nothing to hide. She parked in my garage. She trespassed on my property. If anyone broke the law tonight, it wasn't me." His words carried weight, reassuring the crowd, and more importantly, planting a seed of confidence. They had always feared Patricia's threats of legal consequences, but now, hearing the calm certainty in Michael's voice, they began to see through the illusion. Patricia ended her call, glaring at Michael through the windshield, her eyes wild. "You'll regret this when they arrive. They'll drag you out in handcuffs. I'll see to it you never set foot in this neighborhood again." But her words only made the crowd bristle louder. "We'll tell them everything," Mrs. Johnson snapped back, her voice trembling with righteous anger. "We'll tell them about the fines, the threats, the way you've treated us all. We'll finally tell someone who has to listen." The cheer that followed was unexpected, almost primal. Neighbors who had lived under her thumb for years suddenly felt a collective surge of courage. For once they weren't afraid. Patricia looked around through the glass, her smug mask broken, the realization dawning that the board she had ruled for so long might not survive the night. Her hands trembled on the wheel, and for a flicker of a moment, Michael thought he saw fear cross her face. The sound of distant sirens began to swell, faint but undeniable, a warning that the climax was approaching. The neighbors leaned forward, some tense, others exhilarated, knowing that the next few minutes would decide everything. Would Patricia twist the narrative and claw back her power, or would the truth finally bury her grip on the neighborhood? Michael stayed rooted, calm and steady, his eyes fixed on the garage door as the flashing lights drew closer. The showdown had reached its peak, and the night was about to deliver its verdict. The sirens grew louder until red and blue lights washed over the street, casting the crowd in a glow that made the entire scene look like a stage performance. 2 patrol cars pulled up, their presence sending a hush through the neighbors who only moments ago had been shouting. Officers stepped out, hands resting near their belts, scanning the strange tableau before them. A crowd of residents, a calm homeowner standing in the driveway, and the muffled sound of a furious woman honking and shouting from inside a closed garage. One officer approached Michael, his voice firm but even. "Sir, can you explain what's going on here?" Michael kept his posture straight, his voice measured. "My name is Michael Carter. I came home tonight and found this woman, Patricia Vaughn, parked in my garage without permission. She's a member of our HOA board. I closed the door because this is my private property and she was trespassing. I haven't touched her. I haven't harmed her. But she refused to leave and she's been causing a disturbance ever since." The officer studied him for a moment, then turned toward the garage as Patricia rolled down her window fully and began waving her arms dramatically. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man locked me inside against my will. He's got the whole neighborhood turned against me. This is an unlawful detainment. Arrest him immediately." Her voice cracked with the desperation of someone who expected instant obedience. But the officers didn't move to cuff Michael. Instead, they looked at the neighbors who had already begun stepping forward, eager to have their voices heard. Mrs. Johnson spoke first, her voice trembling but resolute. "That woman has been abusing her power here for years. Tonight she parked in his garage like she owns it. He didn't touch her. He just closed the door. We all saw it." Mr. Alvarez chimed in next. "She fined me for planting vegetables in my yard. She's fined all of us for ridiculous things. She's not the victim here. We've been her victims for years." More voices joined in, overlapping, louder, each one adding another piece to the mosaic of resentment that had built up. The officers glanced at each other, the picture becoming clearer with every testimony. One of them approached the garage and tapped on the glass. "Ma'am, you need to step out of the vehicle." Patricia hesitated, her face pale under the flashing lights. "You don't understand," she sputtered. "I am the board president. I enforce the rules here. These people are twisting everything because they don't like me doing my job." The officer's voice hardened. "Step out of the vehicle, now." Reluctantly, Patricia opened the door and slid out, her heels clicking on the concrete as she tried to compose herself, shoulders squared, chin raised, though her eyes betrayed the panic beneath. She pointed at Michael. "He should be arrested." But the officer shook his head. "Ma'am, this man is within his rights. You entered his garage without permission. That's trespassing. If anything, you're the one who could face charges tonight." The words hit her like a slap. Gasps rose from the crowd, followed by murmurs of satisfaction. For the first time, Patricia Vaughn looked small, stripped of the authority she had wielded for so long. She tried to argue, but her words tangled, her voice breaking as the reality settled in. The officer continued. "If these neighbors want to file complaints, they can. But as of right now, you need to leave this property." Patricia's lips parted, but no sound came. The crowd's silence pressed against her like a weight, dozens of eyes watching as the facade of control she had built for over a decade crumbled in one night. Michael stood tall, saying nothing, letting the moment hang. Finally, Patricia turned, sliding back into her SUV, her hands trembling as she gripped the wheel. The garage door opened at the officer's command and slowly, under the unblinking gaze of her neighbors, she backed out. The humiliation was written in every motion. When she drove away, the crowd erupted in applause, not wild and chaotic, but steady, rhythmic, the sound of a community finally uniting against its oppressor. Michael exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders at last. He looked around at the faces of his neighbors, people who had lived too long under fear but had finally found their voice. That night became more than just a confrontation. It was the breaking point, the spark that led to petitions, meetings, and ultimately the removal of Patricia Vaughn from the board. Change didn't come instantly, but it came, and when it did, the neighborhood felt lighter, freer, no longer burdened by the shadow of one woman's control. As for Michael, he never sought to be a hero, but in locking that garage door he had become the catalyst for something bigger than himself. The balance of power had shifted, and the block would never be the same again.